In the cult, you were silenced. You had to ignore your own needs, and there was no connection with anybody. That's more like trauma bonding. You will connect to somebody who causes you pain. You are afraid of this person, but that creates some weird bond between you. Trauma bonding is a psychological response to abuse. It occurs when the abused person forms an unhealthy bond with the person who abuses them. The person experiencing abuse may develop sympathy for the abusive person, which becomes reinforced by cycles of abuse, followed by remorse. Stockholm Syndrome is one type of trauma bonding. A trauma bond is a connection between an abusive person and the individual they abuse. It typically occurs when the abused person begins to develop sympathy or affection for the abuser. This bond can develop over days, weeks, or months. Not everyone who experiences abuse develops a trauma bond. Stockholm Syndrome is a specific type of trauma bond. While this term typically refers to someone who is captive, developing positive feelings for their captors, this dynamic can occur in other situations and relationships. Stockholm Syndrome may begin when a person experiencing abuse begins to rationalize the actions of the perpetrator. When someone's main source of support is also their abuser, a trauma bond can develop. An abused person may turn to the abusive person for comfort when they are hurt, even if the other person was the one who caused it. Dependence. A person may develop a trauma bond because they rely on the abusive person to fulfill emotional needs. For example, a child relies on their parent or caregiver for love and support. If that caregiver is abusive, the child may come to associate love with abuse, believing that this association is normal. The child may be unable to see the abusive caregiver as bad. The child may instead blame themselves for the abuse as a way of making sense of what is happening to them. This allows the caregiver to continue being good in the child's eyes, which reinforces their bond. When can trauma bonding happen? In theory, trauma bonding can occur in any situation that involves one person abusing or exploiting another. This may include situations that involve domestic abuse, child abuse, incest, elder abuse, exploitative employment, such as one involving people who have immigrated without documentation, kidnapping or hostage-taking, human trafficking, religious extremism, or cults. According to the organization Parents Against Child Exploitation, a trauma bond develops under specific conditions. A person must perceive a real threat or danger from their abuser, experience harsh treatment with small periods of kindness, be isolated from other people and their perspectives, believe that they cannot escape. As we said before, trauma changes the brain, and one of the reactions to trauma is you can be addicted to a substance or something you do, like shopping. There are people that are very addicted to the dopamine rush of shopping, getting new stuff. And then you can be just as addicted to a person, especially in a cult. This is your state of mind. Your cult leader is the savior, and your main occupation will be like a magnifying glass on everything the cult leader does or says, and that is just the same as being addicted to a substance, sugar or alcohol or drugs. It gives you the same dopamine kick, the same rush. Trauma bonding is the issue that is left out of the equation when people ask why do cult members recontact their perps? Why do they keep going back for more abuse? Without understanding chronic trauma and the effect of trauma bonding, it is impossible to understand the dynamic involved. If a person is unable to escape chronic traumatic abuse, they will eventually begin to bond with their perpetrators. It will occur because of the dehumanization of the victim, who may reach a state of feeling that they are robotized or non-feeling, combined with a disruption in the capacity for intimacy caused by the trauma. Trauma impels people both to withdraw from close relationships and to seek them desperately. The profound disruption in basic trust, the common feelings of shame, guilt, and inferiority, and the need to avoid reminders of the trauma that might be found in social life, all foster withdrawal from close relationships, but the terror of the traumatic event intensifies the need for protective attachments. The traumatized person, therefore, frequently alternates between isolation and anxious clinging to others. Many victims of severe and unrelenting trauma, whether domestic violence, incest, or ritual abuse, will find that they feel anxious when alone and fear abandonment and isolation. The overdependent characteristics are not a personality fault, but a result of the chronic abuse. This is often rooted in the fact that as a child, the trauma survivor was not only a captive to their abuse, but they depend upon their perpetrator for food, shelter, or other necessities. In addition, with ritual abuse, a small child will often be abandoned for periods of time to increase their dependency upon the very people who are abusing them. Any 2 or 3-year-old will be almost insanely grateful to be rescued from a small box that they have been confined within for hours, or from the dark confines of a musty basement, where they have been left for a day or two, even the most abusive perpetrator will then become the child's rescuer, which is the foundation of trauma bonding. In trauma bonding, the person's abuser will be perceived as the one who delivers and rescues from the abuse, as well as the tormentor. This creates a psychological ambivalence that creates dissociation in a young child. The very helplessness and terror that are instilled by the abuse cause the child or later the adult to reach out to the only available hand for relief, the perpetrator. And the perpetrator will rescue and stop the abuse, or take the child out of the confines of their pain, but for a price, their unrelenting loyalty and obedience. I remember my second trainer, Dr. Brogan, saying that he was giving himself immortality by going to live inside of me, when I created with his help an internal Dr. Brogan. This alternate personality became a head internal trainer inside, the same role that Dr. Brogan had on the outside. In the cult, it is not uncommon to have a death ritual, where the child is brought to a near-death experience. Afterwards, the rescuers are the trainers who talk soothingly to the child, massage him or her with oils, and tell the child that they owe their life to them. Not only that, but the warning is given. If the child ever tries to break free, they will return to the state of dying. Other setups will include burying a child alive in a box or coffin. Again, the perpetrators will rescue the horrified child, who is almost out of their mind with terror. After several long hours under one condition, undying loyalty to the group and the rescuers. Traumatized beyond belief, the child readily complies. This time of avowal and loyalty will be buried in a deep subconscious layer of the mind. And the older adult or survivor may not be aware that part of the draw to the group is the belief that they owe their life to them. The subconscious fear needs to be dealt with, that leaving the group does not have to mean death, as they were taught in early childhood traumatizations. The survivor who escapes the cult will feel a powerful pullback because of a lifetime of these types of distorted messages. The safe therapist or non-DID friend is not hurting them, and this may create a huge dissonance in a person who up until this point had always been taught that love meant pain. They may doubt the reality of the caring messages of those around them, or need to test their support system over and over. And highly wounded alters who were bonded to believe that they owe their very life to the ones who have abused them most may still try to recontact former perpetrators, not believing that life can be different yet. Undoing a lifetime of this type of teaching and training takes time, patience, perseverance, and prayer. It will stretch the most caring support person as they wonder why the survivor recontact their abuser. So breaking a trauma bond comes with intense withdrawal symptoms, flashbacks, cravings for the toxic person, compulsive thoughts about what happened, and an anxious state that may make you feel like you are going backward without a bay. These very symptoms are confirmation that staying away from the toxic relationship or cult is absolutely imperative to your health. This is because trauma resides as a physiological response to a perceived threat. Your organism knows and reacts at the core, gut, and instinctual level when a person or situation is harmful.
And then there's a genetic component. Some people are what we call high hypnotizable. They have a very good ability to concentrate. They have a vivid imagination. And the thing is that's a good thing, but when you're in that state, your critical analytic faculties are offline, and it makes that person more susceptible to control. So, for example, in Scientology, they have a course called the Communications Course. But in essence, they're teaching people how to go into hypnotic trance and to become obedient. Any excessive amounts of hypnosis, meditation, altered states of consciousness activities can also render someone potentially more vulnerable if they don't understand what I presented in this program tonight. For example, if they don't have a frame for being able to analyze destructive undue influence.
And a good trauma therapist needs to know that. Because when you are in the state, you really need somebody that supports you, has your back,